All right, Mr. Baker, to you first. A federal judge says that what Elon Musk and Doge did with USAID was likely unconstitutional. So what does that mean? Put that move aside. What does that mean for Doge's mission across the board?
Well, look, it undercuts the very heart of what Doge has done so far, right? The most prominent achievement, if you want to call it that, the most prominent thing that they've done was to dismantle the entire United States foreign aid program, to literally, get rid of all the workers, close the building, reestablish it as part of the State Department with only a fraction of what it was doing left over. And it's had enormous impact on places around the world where small amounts of U.S. aid have made outsized difference in fighting disease and poverty and so on. Now what the court is saying is that they exceeded their power, which a lot of critics have said all along. Now, what you are in the middle of course, is a constitutional clash between the executive and the judiciary, in which the president of the United States says he doesn't like it when judges rule against him. He might even impeach them. He said that today in the immigration cases you referenced earlier. And what we're actually going to wonder and watch and see is what the administration does in response to this judge's order. Obviously, they can appeal it. Obviously, this can go all the way up to the Supreme Court eventually. But it's a big defeat at the moment for Elon Musk and his Doge effort.
But does it actually help USAID, Peter? Just think about it. Even since then, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said 80% of the programs that were involved with USAID, we don't need to do it. It's not like tomorrow all those former employees are going to head back to the office and hop back into their cubicles. Like, the damage has already been done.
A lot of damage has been done. Obviously, it's not easy to simply turn the lights back on after they've done what they've done. But the judge is basically saying that they need to take efforts to do that. And the judge is saying you cannot simply get away with what you've done if, in fact, it violates the Constitution. Now, this is not a final order. This is a temporary order at this point while the issue is litigated. But it is an important judgment by this particular judge that there's a likelihood that the Trump administration has violated the Constitution. So, yeah, obviously the practical impact's unclear. It's not something that can be turned around on a dime. But it is, a pretty important moment. We'll see what the Trump administration does in response to it. This is going to be one of those tests as to whether they actually are willing to live with orders of courts that they don't agree with.
All right, Reed, let's talk polling, because NBC News has some polling out that says more Americans actually like the idea of Doge. However, even more Americans than that don't like how Doge is executing it. I think I could have been one of those people polled. So what do we do with that? Because most of Americans are going, yeah, let's make the government more efficient.
Right.
But what they're doing, no bueno.
Right. But I think Peter asked a good question, the practicality of this. Like, they're going to do what they're going to do. They don't care about the polling. They don't care what a judge says to them. To your point, are they going to turn these people's IDs back on? Are they going to turn their email addresses back on? They're not going to do any of those things.
I mean, the USAID signage is in a trash heap
right.
4 weeks ago.
Right, yeah.
I think they're rebuilding it tonight?
That's
no.
my point. They sent it to the dumpster. So I would say this is that so long as they have that first piece of data, people like the idea of Doge. They don't care about the second part, because here's the other part. Most people are trying to get through the day. They're not worried about what's going on here or there. You and I previously discussed how important federal employees are. But it's only important when people start feeling it. If we start to see things like Social Security be affected and other things that are starting to affect Americans in their place of business, at their homes, or whatever the case might be. But until then, I think that they're just going to be like, one more poll. What do we care?
Leanne Caldwell is joining us now, Chief Washington Correspondent for Puck News. Leanne, let's talk about Chief Justice Roberts, his rebuke of Donald Trump. How rare is it to hear something like that?
Yeah, it's absolutely rare. Chief Justice Roberts has issued warnings before, not so directly, but just saying that the independence of the courts should be upheld and should be, not admired, but yeah, should be upheld. Forgot my word there. But this was a moment that the Trump administration and Republicans and MAGA world did not like. The fact that Chief Justice John Roberts inserted himself into this conversation. You have people who are piling on, including Elon Musk, saying, sending threatening like messages to John Roberts. And this is where the Trump administration thinks that so many of these cases are going to end up. And you have Stephen Miller and other Trump administration officials who were confident that the Supreme Court is going to uphold the Trump administration in a lot of these cases once it gets there. And so part of the playbook is not only to intimidate these justices, but really make their case in the court of public opinion and get the rallying Republicans behind them in order to put pressure on these justices and these judges along the way so that they think that they can win these cases.
Reed, what do you think? Yes, it's rare to see Chief Justice Roberts do this, but tomorrow people will forget what he said. But is he sending a message to Trump, like, don't go there, we're not pushovers?
Maybe, but to what end? What's the point? Remember, I mean, I'm no legal jurist, but didn't last summer they say whatever it is he did was an official act and therefore he couldn't be prosecuted for it? Why wouldn't he just say, well, everything I do is an official act because you guys told me? And so this is the other part we forget. The court doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. Right? That belongs to the Justice Department or the military. They're not going to enforce anything. And so do I think it's important? Did he try and send a message? Yes. The question I had, and I talked to a very smart legal person earlier tonight, is did he wait too long? Should he not have said this at the beginning of the administration when he said, we've seen what you tried to do last time. We're not going to do it again.
Even if he said it at week 1, how would that change anything?
You're right. That's the whole point. It doesn't matter. We have to get out of this idea. Somebody said we're at an inflection point. Stephanie, we have inflected. We're well past inflection. We are now into the new normal.
All right. Well, last night I asked Stuart Stevens on a 1 to 10, panic, concern, fear of what's happening in this administration. I'm not going to tell you his number. What's yours?
I'd say a 7.
Ah,
yeah.
His is an 11. Peter, what is your take on what Chief Justice Roberts did today?
Well, look, Reed is right. I think that the problem for the courts is how do they enforce an order if they have a president who is willing to defy them? We've never had a president in modern times. We've had some who flirted with this in the distant past. But in the modern times, presidents have recognized, even when they didn't like court rulings, they had to go along with it. In my book on Bush 43, for instance, there was an effort when he lost a case in the Supreme Court on Guantanamo to get him to try to overrule the Supreme Court. And President Bush said, no, I'm not going to do that. And even in that case, he was talking about getting legislation from Congress, not simply defying it on his own, certainly not trying to impeach justices for a ruling he didn't like. But what Roberts did today was important in one sense. What he did was he said, look, it's not just Jeb Boasberg, the chief judge of the U.S. District Court here. This is the judiciary as a whole. And in fact, he took some of the arrows away from Jeb Boasberg, so they're not all targeted at this one so-called rogue judge. What Roberts is saying is, look, this is about the judiciary in general. You may not like this judge's ruling, but you have a process to appeal it if that's what you want to do. But you have to abide by it as long as it's the ruling of the court. And yes, obviously, the issue of how he enforces it is a big question if you end up having a rogue president not willing to go along with it. But he basically institutionalized this fight. So it's not just about a single judge, which I think the president would have preferred it to be. And you haven't seen the president respond to it yet.
All right, Peter, take us back to the 10 years you spent living in Moscow. What was your take on the call today between President Trump and Vladimir Putin? 90 minutes.
Yeah. Look, obviously, they didn't get what they wanted, right? The president did not get what he wanted. He wanted 30 ceasefire. President Trump, did not get what he wanted. President Putin probably did. President Trump wanted a 30-day across-the-board ceasefire. That Putin refused to give it to him. Now, he did say he wouldn't attack utilities and electric power plants if Ukraine doesn't attack them in Russia, and Zelensky has agreed to do that. So that's not nothing. That's not. That's important for both people, but it's not what Trump set out to do. And I think what Trump has learned today, or certainly has been made evident today, whether he's learned it or not, is that Putin isn't going to simply go along because Trump wants him to do something. Putin laid out his expansive terms for any kind of negotiation, well beyond anything that Zelensky has agreed to do, and well beyond what previous presidents and Congresses would have agreed to do. He said basically that you have to not only agree to stop fighting for 30 days, you have to agree that there will be no foreign aid whatsoever for Ukraine. Ukraine's not going to want to go along with that, of course, because that means that they are vulnerable to Russia simply disregarding this ceasefire and attacking again, and they wouldn't have the foreign help that they need.
Reid, you work for all sorts of Republicans. One specifically comes to mind, Senator John McCain. Mm-hmm. What would John McCain be thinking? What would he be saying tonight as he would watch Donald Trump's approach to Russia?
I think we should remember what he said when he looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes. He said he saw 3 letters, K, G, and B. This is a man who spoke to the Ukrainian people in 2013 at the Maidan and their freedom. As they rose to freedom, as they rose to free themselves from Putin-backed puppets. I think he is probably looking down on us, and he is a very unhappy person. He rightfully should be. Remember, this is a guy who was on standby during the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? I mean, Senator McCain had a long history with this part of the world and very much understood that the Russians are bad guys. They're not good guys, and they've never been our friends.
Leanne, what are people on the Hill saying, specifically Republicans, who for decades and decades had a very clear opinion of who Russia is, the opinion that the majority of the American people do, our adversary?
Well, what has been happening on Capitol Hill over the past couple years, infused by Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, and those sorts of allies, is that public opinion has been shifting away from Ukraine, or Republicans have been shifting away from Ukraine and becoming a bit more sympathetic toward Putin. Now, that is a very minority faction of the party, but in effect, their actions by criticizing Zelensky, by standing with Trump in his criticisms of Zelensky, of threatening never to give Zelensky any more aid, financial, military, humanitarian aid, is in effect indirectly supporting Vladimir Putin. Now, Republicans will get quite uncomfortable when Donald Trump says something like that Ukraine started the war. It's hard to find Republicans who will come out and explicitly support that. But the foreign policy of the United States is what the Republicans are backing and supporting, and that is the clearest indication of how their positions and their opinions about Russia have shifted over the years.